teachers in West Virginia and Paris would disagree. Just this morning, we got a dispatch from Paris, and I'll read a second about the massive transit strike. In that Parisians thronged the sidewalks, took to bikes and scooters, or canceled their morning commutes altogether Friday, faced with the biggest public transportation strike in nearly 13 years. This is a warning shot to President Emmanuel Macron over its ambitious pension overhaul. 10 out of 14 metro lines were shut down, and iron gates were pulled tight over many stations. This shows that collective action is possible. These potentialities are replicable in other centers throughout the capitalist world, throughout the industrialized world, and these struggles need to be supported and deepened by rank-and-file militant activists who are carrying this flag. We may be small in number at this juncture, but we have the ideas and the seeds to spark much larger fightbacks as the class struggle deepens in the face of relentless capitalist austerity. So for the first panel, we have the scope of labor's retreat. We have Julius Arscott, former OPSEU Executive Board member and member of the WAM Steering Committee. Rebecca Keach, an auto worker, Oshawa auto worker, member of Unifor Local 222, and Jay Idarari, a rank-and-file union activist from CUPW. So I will send it off to our first speaker, Rebecca, and we will get started. Thank you, Rebecca.
I'm going to speak a little bit about what happened at GM. There was a closure announcement in late November of last year, and the immediate response of the workers was that they were extremely upset. It had gotten leaked out through social media on Sunday, and there wasn't an official announcement until Monday, so people were really panicking and quite frustrated. When the initial announcement came down, the workers walked out of the plant. The leadership supported the walkout, and then the leadership walked them back in the next day.
Shame.
It makes for interesting dynamics. So there was a very significant campaign led by Unifor. It was an aggressive PR campaign, and it was also problematic. It's significant though because in Canada we rarely see labor pushing back in the manner that they did in the past couple of decades. So I'll give them that. The campaign included walking out of GM on the first day. When GM said, well, Unifor said, let's talk about this. We're going to give you some proposals. GM said, give us over the Christmas period to look at it, and we'll get back to you in the beginning of January. So everybody was waiting for the beginning of January to come around to find out if there had been any movement. And GM came back and said no, that there wasn't, and workers walked again, which was supported by leadership, and then they were brought back in again. Throughout this campaign, one of the first things that they did was the t-shirts that say Oshawa GM. Unfortunately though, this is what they put on the back, is that Canada didn't bail out GM to send jobs to Mexico and China, which is a bit of a problematic message from a labor point of view. Through the campaign, so supplier unit in Teva, they walked out with the support of the leadership for a shift and then walked back in. In Teva, they do parts. They're part of Local 1090.
Okay.
Lear Seating in Whitby walked out for a shift. There was a drive-around blockade of GM after a union meeting. It wasn't well enough attended to create an entire line of cars, but it was well enough attended to show that in a couple of particular areas that you would be able to shut down GM. They didn't make it last long enough to do that. It was only a couple of hours, and I guess it was more like a flexing of the muscles of what could happen, but it didn't proceed further than that. They did a blockade of the headquarters close to GM, which is something that I don't quite understand. It was well attended. It didn't interfere with production at all. They stayed there for 3 days, and I believe that they did get an injunction to leave. They leafleted the Montreal Car Show, so former workers from St. Therese, a plant that has already been closed for quite some time, were there leafleting the Montreal Car Show. They had splitting at the Toronto Car Show for 2 different days, I think with 200 and 300 workers showing up respectively. They did bridge banner drops, so hanging a banner over the 401 to say that we need good jobs in Canada. And they did an aggressive ad campaign. One of the ads that they did was about the vehicle identification number. You may have heard it. If it starts with a 3, it's not for me. And that was talking about boycotting Mexican-made vehicles specifically. They did more ads that they also put on the Super Bowl, and they had ads slated to run on the Academy Awards. And Jerry Diaz related at the Unifor convention that before the ads were supposed to run on the Academy Awards, that they got a phone call from GM asking if they were going to do that. And Jerry said yes, and GM said something to the extent of, would you reconsider? And he said something like, well, would you reconsider not closing our plant? And they said, let us get back to you, and then called back within an hour or two to say that they had a suggestion that was far from perfect but might be a resolution. And out of that resolution, we see the saving of approximately 300 jobs, which doesn't include mass vehicle production, which represents, like, in the 80s there was between 17 and 22,000 workers there. I think it's 17,000 hourly workers at the GM facility alone, plus salaried workers, and now we're going to be down to approximately 300. It's a significant loss to the community. So we're losing about just over 2,000 direct jobs from GM, and another just over 1,700 independent supplier parts jobs. And these aren't fantastic jobs to begin with. The supplier parts are generally making between $15 and $20 an hour. I think the highest might be at Lear, that was around 26 to 28. But there's been a tremendous push by GM over the past, I guess, more than a decade now to drive wages and benefits down. They've been very, very successful. But as we can see, concessionary bargaining hasn't done anything to save the jobs at our plant. So some things that were significant is we had press conferences that were well attended by the media, but the union did not have any organizing meetings amongst the members. There was no educational meetings set up to discuss how you should respond to different tactics, or to even discuss what tactics could be used. Any questioning of the tactics or push for more member involvement was immediately decried as an attack on the leadership, and you would be bullied into, we have to support the leadership, this is what they're elected for, and you couldn't, very difficult to try to pull the conversation into a more militant place. Because, so what I've learned is the first thing that happens when there's a plant closure is mass emotional chaos. People are upset, they are angry, they're frightened, and they look for leadership. And we did get leadership, but I don't think that the ask was big enough. I'm not sure, Sid Ryan, how many of you are familiar with him, former OFL leader. He's been highly critical of Unifor throughout the past year or two, and he made a post criticizing Unifor, and somebody asked him, so Sid, what is it that you would have done so differently than what Unifor did? And I think his response is worth noting. He said, I would not have stopped the membership from organizing walkouts to disrupt the just-in-time chain. I would not have prevented plant occupations. I would not have dampened down political actions to put pressure on the Ontario and federal governments. I would not have boycotted the meetings to discuss nationalization of the plant and to repurpose it. I would not have held a rally in Windsor to protest an Oshawa plant closure, and I would not have ramped up the rhetoric and called for a boycott of Mexican-made autos. The membership voted to explore the possibility of public ownership of the plant. So that's, it identifies some issues that were problematic. I mean, our union, we did, Sting did a public awareness concert on behalf of GM. That was very nice. They had a rally in Windsor that probably had about 1,000 people attend, but it's a little problematic that the rally was in Windsor and the plant is closing in Oshawa. There was no significant downtime, at least from what I would consider significant. A few hours here and there, to me, wasn't a sufficient response of downtime towards GM. Something that was also problematic is the announcement of the resolve was made far from the members, and it was presented at a joint Unifor GM media event. So the details were presented with Jerry and GM management to the media, and that's how the members discovered the resolve and the first parts of the resolve. I think that serves to highlight a bit of a partnership approach between the union and management, which has been a slippery slope that they've been going down, and it has been problematic as far as I can see for what's been happening. Yeah, I think that about covers it from my perspective. I mean, there's a couple of things I can say. Once again, that it was a significant campaign that they launched. And I try to imagine what it could have been like if they had put those resources and combined it with militant member action, what may have been able to be achieved. But I can't say that I'm overly excited with how things have turned out. And just for clarification, I did keep my recall rights, so I am one of the people who potentially are going to benefit from those 300 jobs. I'll be looking at between a 1 to 3 year layoff, and if things go smoothly with the UAW bargaining, and then smoothly with our Big Three bargaining next September, then potentially I could have a job. But I'm not sure that we've seen enough from GM to give me any real confidence in their ability to keep their commitments. And I guess that would be my presentation.
Here, here. Excellent presentation. Excellent, Mark. Thank you for speaking. Jay, I think we can toss it off to you.
Okay, I'm coming from Canadian Union of Postal Workers. The first time I walk in, it's a kind of cultural change. I'm coming from a colonized British, and we learn to say, we don't call anybody by name, first name. We try to call by Mr. So-and-so. So it's a kind of conservative, but I grow up in a world of red, but still the customary things are there, okay? Now, when I land in Canada, post, I become a Canada Post employee a year. I had to make a living. And then when I walk into that place, there were union reps, but union reps for secluded groups. Okay, there are temporary employees were in disarray. They were tossed around like, it's a kind of slavery, modern slavery. For as a human, I felt my humanity has been downgraded to nowhere, and then because of my color, because of my appearance and talk and accent, so I have been treated differently. Not only me, in the entire group. A lot of people, they took it as a, oh yeah, we come to Canada, so we have to obey by the system. So I tend to think different. Okay, it's kind of an insult and slap on the face of humanity, treat you like shit. Okay, I'm not against whites, but the thing is, it's white man's world, simply. Okay, as a casual, I went to washroom, even the superintendent started to follow me to monitor my time. Man,
Disgusting.
all of a
Disgusting.
sudden, I become a modern slave in that Crown Corporation. They call it the flagship of human rights. Crown Corporation. So then I thought to become a silent rebel, and then within a year I become a union rep. So that this softy, the immigrant, how is going to be a militant union rep? Okay, because our union's kind of militant union. Whereas I know that the union failed to represent the majority of the immigrant workers inside Kandapur. They simply ignore, oh yeah, that's right. You follow us, we use your support for elections and all. Other than that, we have nothing to say. I forced myself in the union. Okay, the humanity speak first, whether you are black or white or brown. So when we cut our skin open, we bleed red. Okay, that's our language, that's our race, that's our culture, that's our religion, that's all. Okay, beyond that, I being a Tamil, Hindu, it doesn't matter. I had to be treated as a human in my workplace wherever I go. I become a human rights rep. So I raised this one. So then I asked, why do you use this brother, sister instead of comrades? Oh yeah, that's communism. I said, communism is a sin here? It's a kind of a strange word, or that forbidden language here in Canada? No, it's okay. Then that's the beginning. Okay, we don't live in apology because compassionate capitalism in North America push us into their system to apologize for who we are, the working class. Okay, but the 99%. So somebody is telling that this is forbidden words in North America. So our union, being a militant union, even tend to accept those norms from the capitalist. So I asked J.C. Perot, he's a great guy. He fought for us as well as he spread that maternity leave for Indian Canadians. But still, our action based on politics are zero. Okay, union is not only for benefits, it's for humanity. Okay, so that's what I come from. It's a working class that India whole community has to support. We had to have inroads with the community organizations and build a political power. That's the ultimate goal. Not that we get collective agreement signed. That's the success of life. No.
Yeah.
So we had to take the power in our hand to run governments or organization to build a society of freedom with humanity, human rights. Simple.
Yeah.
So we are not building union to get only benefits. So the political freedom should be there. We had to have inroads, we had to have influence, so we had to have power in our hand to build a society we look for.
Okay.
It's a long journey, but I started as a human rights rep. I become a health and safety human rights national, and then they say, even human rights, they say, oh, Jay is a rebel kind of politician. But I asked them, who you are then? Union reps? Only for secular groups? So I am here. We cry for Palestine, we cry for Tibet, we cry for Kashmiris, we cry for Indian native people who have uprooted from their livelihood. We cry for everybody, not only for our members, our credit groups. So that's what I am kind of in a dilemma. I am in a union where it's a militant union, but is it politically doing enough? No. That's what, sometimes I stand like a loner in our own platforms because, Jay only talks about international politics and human rights. Hey man, that's what we are. Okay? Don't limit yourself fighting with Dartford only. Okay? Dartford is not the only person. It comes from Mike Harris era. It's a chain of, it's a system. So if we don't address the system, and if we don't address the system in front of our members and the meetings, if we don't talk politics, okay, the need to get the power in our hand, unionists is in disarray. So politicalized action first, unions are part of it. Without politics, there's no union. Okay, there's no conservative unionism. But here I see that. Okay, union is a second part of the management. Okay, though nobody knows what is trade unionism, what is working class. Oh, we are somewhat good, well-paid union members. That's what our union members are, most of them are telling. So it's a shame that 33% of our members, unions members supporting conservatives and crying the union do anything. So who is at fault? That we fail to educate our membership that who we are first. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Jay. Yeah, we've had some great discussions so far. I think the modern slavery in the Crown Corp, what you touched on, is becoming more prevalent. I'm a liquor board clerk at the LCBO, and the casualization of labor is massive to the point where there are no full-time jobs pretty much anymore. It's a permanent precariat status, and the only thing that can kind of guarantee you some sort of stability there is time, right? And I take it's a similar aspect to Canada Post, right? So we've seen, the GM, the loss of full-time jobs, the casualization of labor elsewhere, and the effects this produce on people in general, right? As we become more and more desperate, and our unions become the leaders of our unions act more as agents of capital, right? And we've seen this recently with the pullback from the desire from more of the rank and file to go after Ford, right? So unions as class struggle words is key, right? And what we, one of my favorite quotes from Lenin, but not to act as trade union secretaries, but as overall tribunes of the people, right? And not just defeating Ford, but defeating the boss class that finances him. So aspects of white supremacy are very much embedded in union bureaucracy, right? Julius, I'm going to toss it on to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Sam. So I'm Julius Arscott. I'm on the steering committee of the Workers' Action Movement. I'm a former executive board member of OPSU here in Region 5, and I'm with OPSU Local 532. I work for the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, just uptown a little bit. So my talk is going to be more on the sort of the conditions on the ground and reflecting again on what Sam ended his sentence there with the fact that, the current labor bureaucracy really plays a fundamental role in upkeeping the system that we exist in today, and how much of a travesty that is, considering what is happening all around us, where we have in Great Britain we have a leader of the British Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, who is on the brink of possibly being elected as Prime Minister of Great Britain on a platform of renationalization of public services. And even in the United States, the idea of socialism, people have their own concept of that, is becoming increasingly popular. And even here in Canada, the majority of Canadians look favorably to the ideas of socialism. And yet, the two main arms of the workers' movement in this country, our Labour Party and our labor movement, are dominated by a bureaucratic layer that absolutely refuses to budge and provide any space whatsoever for those radical ideas. So, even going, so I don't want to go over all of the crimes of Ford or the potential crimes of Ford.
Be here for hours.
And it's important though to say that it is Ford, the election of Ford, just like the election of Trump, is more of a symptom of a system that is in crisis. It is a symptom that we need to look beyond just personalities, but we have to look at systemic challenges. But going back to the election, so the last time there was an OFL convention, there was a big debate on whether or not the OFL, the Ontario Federation of Labour, should support the NDP in the upcoming provincial election. And there was a big battle on the floor, and there were several attempts to try to quash this idea. Both were defeated. We came out of that convention with a very clear mandate. The OFL was going to call on the affiliates, make a recommendation that the OFL would call for a vote for the NDP. And so what happened when the writ was dropped? What did Chris Buckley do? What did he tell the media? The first thing that came out of his mouth is, we do not tell our affiliates how they should vote.
Shame.
And this is just an example. He changed that weeks later. He changed that, and the OFL started to slightly put into gear, supporting Andrea Horwath, who ran on a more, for the NDP anyway, slightly more progressive campaign than usual. They were elected the official opposition, thankfully, but could have done much better if Labour had pulled its weight. In March, there was a big conference, Take Back Ontario conference at the Metro Toronto Convention Centre. The event was billed as a discussion to initiate a coordinated fight back against the Conservative Doug Ford government. It was not a decision-making body, which is something that we would always fight for. If you're going to get Labour activists together, we should come out of these things with a plan that the rank and file come up with, or that they approve. And so basically, it resulted in no real action. In fact, the only reason why that meeting took place most likely is because of groups like the Workers' Action Movement and other activists on the left pressuring the labor movement to do something. We'd launched a campaign calling on an emergency convention to organize general strike action, which we got several bodies to adopt, but unfortunately it didn't really go where we wanted it to go. Following that conference, there were Labour Council meetings that were organized, likely as well as a result of our pressure. But you know, the Labour bureaucrats, it's clear they want to push aside the notion of mass action and rely solely on electoral politics. But we can see the results of that tactic in Manitoba today, where the Tory government was re-elected with a majority government for the second time, because the labor movement in that province basically did nothing during the entire first mandate of the Tories. They said, we don't need to rely on strike action, we need to focus on the election. And this tactic is a losing game, and it will be a losing game for us as well, because we don't know what's going to happen. Ford could get elected again. He could get elected with another majority government. What we do know is that poverty is getting worse. Many people are thinking of the crash from 2008 to today as being the lost decade. And the gross inequality is so bad at this point, and I saw a statistic recently that around the world, all new wealth created in 2018, 82% of that wealth went to the 1%. 82%. I mean, it's staggering how the inequality is happening. And that's happening because, well, historically, it's been the organized working class who has fought for wage increases, benefit increases, shorter work day. But that's not happening. It's not happening here. It's not happening in most of the developed world. But it's much worse here. There's been continuous attacks on organized labor from the ruling class, with little to no response from organized labor. And this is also on the heels of decades of concessions bargaining, 2- and 3-tier. I know you folks were dealing with 3-tier wages. What that means is you've got people who are doing the same work, but based on when their hiring date was, they're compensated differently. How is that fair? So that's through wages and benefits. The public sector has dealt with years of wage freezes while the cost of living has continued to go up. And there have been attacks on pensions and benefits. The right to strike has basically, in Canada, has disappeared. I mean, we have the right to strike until we use it, right?
Yeah.
The CUPW went on a strike, and many of us were involved with supporting the last strike and the actions. And this was on the heels of a court ruling that basically said that the first time that you folks were ordered back, it was illegal, and Canada Post did it again. So this is the kind of hypocrisy, and when I hear liberals try to tell me, and this is not just a reflection on Unifor, it is on the Unifor leadership, but it's also a reflection on many unions' leadership, that they should strategically vote or they should vote liberal. We sure as fuck don't. We don't vote for strike-breaking parties. We don't vote for the boss's party. For liberals to act like they're friends of labor is absolutely disgusting in the wake of what has just happened, and it's a problem. Other issues of union democracy, you know, the right to express dissenting opinion without fear of retribution from the leadership. Some of us have been, you know, more of a victim than others. Barry was banned from speaking in his union for 10 years after
Shame.
trying to get some information to support his members in the substitute teachers union. He was attacked by thugs who were hired by OSSTF security folks outside of a meeting. Many other folks who tried to be active and ask questions in their union are shut down on a regular basis. And of course, the issue of free collective bargaining. In OPSEU, the Ontario Public Service, which I belong to, and several other divisions, when Kathleen Wynne, before she left, the employer, the employer, Kathleen Wynne's, you know, people that their government chose, negotiated rollover agreements with the heads of union, and that's not how bargaining is supposed to work. You know, workers elect a bargaining team to represent them. The bargaining team should be the one who negotiates with the employer, not hired staff that make a couple $100,000 a year and smoking. It's bullshit. And this completely demobilizes the rank and file to be able to think about or fight these bigger issues. I want to focus on young workers a little bit because while the lines are become gray, and actually there was a meme that I had projected there earlier. There was
First time.
Has anyone seen the Coen Brothers movie? The last one they did. This is like a series of short little films. So there's what's that actor's name?
James Franco.
James Franco. So there's an image of James Franco in this story. He escapes being executed by being, you know, killed. Well, he wasn't killed. He escaped it, luckily. In the end, they get him, and there's a picture of him with a noose around his neck. And the meme says, millennials to Generation Z, as a recession nears, is this your first time? Because in the movie, of course, he escaped the first, well, he didn't really escape it, he was executed and then he came back. Anyway, you haven't seen it. But it was actually
Everyone look it up.
because we certainly are entering a period where everyone is saying that that we're going to enter another recession, and the conditions for young workers that I'm going to go through are likely going to get worse than they are right now. There's increased job precariousness. People are employed at contract, temporary, or part-time with low wages. Precarious jobs tend to be paid considerably less than those in permanent full-time jobs and have much less in terms of benefits, job security, and regular hours. Women and racialized workers are much more likely to be employed in these types of jobs. In the trades, I'm not going to go into the trades too much, but they recently had an agreement, which I think was a concessionary agreement, and Kurt will probably go into that a bit, where they have to deal with all kinds of surveillance, precariousness, working alone and doing dangerous work, completing work in unrealistic timelines and that type of thing. And of course, young workers are often saddled with huge amounts of debt because they are students. In Canada, there's the average debt for students is around $28,000 from the statistics that I saw. That includes everyone, so you have some students who might have zero debt, and then others who have $100,000 of debt or more, and it's $15 billion nationwide in terms of debt in Canada. In 2016, the National College Health Association a survey found that 65% of students reported feeling overwhelmed, having overwhelmed levels of anxiety. 1 in 45 students reported a suicide attempt in the previous year. Almost 40% of people aged 15 to 24 are unemployed or underemployed, and signs are now pointing towards another major recession. We are also the first generation to grow up our entire lives under the shadow of catastrophic climate change, and knowledge that human extinction is not only possible but probable unless we drastically restructure our society. There are major, we have major hurdles ahead, and I think that there's, if you look at some of the statistics about where people want, government to focus on, It's not being addressed. And it seems quite clear that the roadblock within the workers' movement in Canada, being the Labour Party and the Labour movement, is the status quo bureaucracy, which continuously goes out of its way to dampen or not encourage the memberships to ask for bigger gains or to fight for change. And I'll keep going. I mean, the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Toronto is $2,300 a month. There was a recent Ipsos poll.
3 bedrooms or 4?
One.
Just joking.
Yeah.
Let's clarify. Yeah. Fucking ridiculous.
There was a recent Ipsos poll that found that the majority of Canadians feel that society is broken and the economy is rigged in favor of the elites. That's politicians don't care about them. And this is similar to a recent poll that was put out in the United States, which is it's interesting. So already people are struggling to pay for food, clothing, and shelter. The global economy is winding down, and the coming recession will make things much worse. So as labor militants and activists, we insist that it's ridiculous to wait, for the next election to elect a new party. Without a militant mass struggle against the status quo, it is impossible for the working class and students to, they will continue to be demoralized, and we need them to feel like they can fight and that they can win. We don't want to be sidelined and pushed aside like when Harris was reelected after some Labour bureaucrats pulled the plug on the Ontario Days of Action decades ago. So, and actually, Tanya just walked in. I mean, there are some examples of rank and file efforts to try to challenge the status quo. There's a campaign right now that's launched by QP Local 2. There you go, free public transit.
Here, here.
Which is,
What else though? Tell me more.
which is getting a lot of attention, and perhaps you want to say a few words, Tanya.
Yeah, forgive
when
me
we
for
start.
having walked in.
No, that's fine, that's fine. It's good timing, actually. That's a great example of one campaign that was started by, rank and file efforts. There's been talks for several years now, the LEAP Manifesto, now the Green New Deal. These are both major project plan, ideas that address climate change, but also creating green new jobs. This is something that needs to be, supported. And again, there are parts of the labor bureaucracy that have come absolutely out of their way to try to prevent this type of thing from being adopted. And I'm sure Tanya will give a few examples of what's been going on in QP as well. Although now there's been enough pressure built up, and that's the key, that the bureaucrats are basically forced to concede that these activists who come up with this far-fetched idea, can't be ignored. We should turn every dollar loaned by the Canada Student Loans Program into non-repayable grants to help the young workers who are saddled with debt. I think that, again, it's important for us to realize that while we have all of these massive struggles ahead of us, that Canadians the majority now, really do think of these radical ideas or these ideas that challenge the status quo as real possibilities, and they support them. I said earlier that 58% of Canadians see socialism positively. So we need to defy back-to-work legislation when it happens. We have to confront and shut down the alt-right, white supremacist groups wherever they appear, and WAM has been doing that quite a bit. We need to occupy spaces that are under threat from the Thug Fort government. The slogan of educate, agitate, organize must take on a more radical meaning and come to life to spark mass resistance and force an entrenched labor bureaucracy to join us on the streets as we confront the major assault on the working class in Ontario that is taking shape at breakneck speed. And we need to build workers' action movement. And the next session after we do our Q&A, we'll be discussing our potential plans going into the OFL convention, where we want to elaborate and demonstrate these ideas to the labor movement, to delegates from affiliated unions from across UFL. We've got candidate, and the Brent back there, Barry Conway, who's running for president of the OFL. Kurt Young, who is a member of WHAM, who has expressed some interest in running for one of the top positions. So stay tuned, and I think I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you. Excellent panel, guys. Excellent talks. It was interesting, just a few concluding remarks. We had the Democratic Party leadership debate, where Bernie described Canada as a democratic socialist, or an example of democratic socialism, which is interesting.
What's he smoking?
But we certainly have a
some.
block in terms of how our working class organizations are manifesting this. We have electoral politics strategies from the unions, but they're not even unsure who to vote for. They don't necessarily even call for a vote for the Canada's Labour Party. It's just saying vote against Scheer, right? So that's kind of opposed to mass action. So with the retreat of militant labor militancy, we see corresponding losses of our social wage, of course, pensions, benefits, healthcare. And it was interesting. We even have some unions in the U.S. openly backing the bosses' parties in terms of, I think I saw SIIU and SEIU and the United Auto Workers. They actually came out against Bernie's Medicaid for All plan. In sort of a weird kind of calculation to protect their own narrow bureaucratic interests, right? So what are trade unions for? Is it to lift society up as a whole and eliminate competition for all workers, or are trade unions, as the business unions would see it, consultancy agencies where we pay fees to get services, right? Contractors versus employees, right? We have a court ruling in Canada right now about the Foodora workers, and I think Uber drivers. There's also legislation in certain states that is looking at this. But struggle will decide this question, not the courts or not the legislature. It's just the workers of these shops that will decide whether they will be contracted or as contractors or employees. So the coming recession, will seem to make matters worse, and the basis for an organized class struggle left wing in the unions and in society at large is something that must be built and organized, right? So when the system can no longer pretend to operate normally, there is an opening and there is leadership and there is basis there for people to fight back and take control of their own destinies. Thank you for our panelists. Stick around. We'll have our next panel at 3 p.m. And now we're going to go to a question and answer period. And I think I have one brother over here who is for the first on the list. Maybe I'll take 5 speakers and then we'll go to the panelists. 5 questions. So I have brother over there, Barry, Kurt. So if I'll mark names down as they go. So and we're looking also for gender parity. Brother over here, so I don't know your name. So Mr. Yellow Vest, the good yellow vest.
Orange vest.
French yellow vest.
The French yellow vest, the good kind.
Yeah.
My name is Alexander Watson,
Oh, sorry, Alexander.
and I'm one of the founding members of North W, which is the National Organization of Retired Postal Workers. And I've been watching a lot of CPAC. And from that, I've managed to make up a list of things that have bothered me the most about watching this program. The first one is Bill C-27, and that's a bill aimed at converting our defined pension plans into a targeted benefit plan, which would mean that our pensions would be geared to the stock market. So if the stock market were to take a dive, your pension check would be that much smaller the next week. I know, it's ridiculous. That's Bill C-27. Bill 66 is a bill designed to delete the current mandatory reporting of toxins used in the manufacture of products. That means that they don't want to tell us what they're putting into the air and the water to churn out their products.
Shame.
So my idea would be, for when you go back to your union meeting, your general meetings, see if you can get a motion to create and distribute a boycott list for the membership to post on workplace bulletin boards. Some of the targets I've chosen are GM, boycott GM products and services, and things like Uber and Lyft, which are undermining the taxi industry in this country. They're not required to have a plate, which taxi drivers do. They pay an exorbitant fee for this license to drive a taxi. And now all of a sudden someone comes along and says, well, now I'm a taxi too, pay me, I'm cheaper. Another example of that is the automatic checkout. When you go into the Metro or Shoppers Drug Mart, you'll see a machine, and they want you to use that machine, scan your own items out, and a couple of months later, one of those cashiers has disappeared. We're killing jobs. We're undermining these people's work by using these machines. So these are the kind of things that I would like to hear discussed at the union meetings. And I'd like to encourage everybody to bring this up, talk it up, because otherwise it's going unnoticed. Thank you.
Mr. Sir in the lamp shirt. I think that's you, Barry.
There's more than one lamp shirt in this hall, and we should make some more and sell them so that everyone has such a shirt. I want to thank everyone who spoke. These were quite inspiring reports, comments, analyses. I just want to supplement what Brother Jay had to say about the Postal Workers Union, which is historically, at least in contemporary labor movement history, Canada's most militant democratic union. The postal workers went on rotating strikes last October, November. How many of you will remember participating in a picket line? And what were they fighting for? I'm going to mention two things. You can add more if you wish. Equal pay. Rural workers, mainly women, are paid less than urban delivery workers and plant workers. And that's sexist exploitation that deserves to be confronted and smashed. And secondly, they're fighting for green energy vehicles and postal banking, which would generate jobs and reduce Canada's carbon footprint. But the response of the Trudeau government was to engage in strike breaking. They undertook, postal workers, coast to coast to coast, rotating strikes. And the Trudeau government passed legislation which violates the Charter, which violates the Canada Labour Relations Act, which violates the human right to engage in free collective bargaining and to withdraw your labor when you're facing unsafe and unacceptable conditions. So we in the Workers' Action Movement, with allies across the labor movement and across the country, from Halifax to Victoria, we organized blockades. I participated in blockades at the South Central plant and at the Gateway plant up near Pearson. And we couldn't sustain that, but we did undertake massive protest actions which shut down two of the biggest postal facilities in this country for hours and hours and hours. But Justin Trudeau is a goddamn strikebreaker. He's a scab for the bosses. Canada Post is setting the tone. He would like to do what Stephen Harper openly said, and that's to privatize the Postal Service, but we're going to continue to fight that. But the postal workers need to play the leading role that they played historically in winning maternity leave and many other gains for working people. We need them to find the inner reserve, to defy strike-breaking legislation and to stand up for their agenda, which is our agenda. Now I want to say a word about the education sector. I've been a teacher for 35 years. I'm a member of OSSTF, unfortunately. Before that, I was a proud member of Ontario Public Service Employees Union and on the executive board of this organization here. But right now, teachers and CUPE education support workers are taking strike votes. They're taking strike votes because the Harris cuts are cutting very, very deeply. All kinds of programs have been eliminated, jobs have been killed, lunch service workers removed, and 3,500 classroom teacher jobs are being phased out. Already at the Toronto District School Board, 80 plus teachers have been laid off, and some are now doing long-term occasionals. But where does this leave substitute teachers? I organize the substitute teachers. from scratch about 30 years ago and led a strike in 1990 that achieved the best collective agreement for these kind of workers at a large public sector employer, precarious workers. But substitute teachers still have no job security or even any kind of minimum income on which they can count, because the CAP dispatch list, which our bargaining unit, and there's another member here, Janine, who was on the bargaining team at the time, won. The dispatch cap was given away by the present leadership after they removed the democratically elected local leadership, myself included, from office. They gave away the cap, and they barred me from attending union meetings for 10 years because I fought the concessionary politics of the union. So we see in the case of teachers and education support workers whose strike votes will be known very soon, could be on the cutting edge of a blistering fight back against the Doug Ford cuts, and could pave the way to a massive workers' resistance across the board. We will see. We will see in the coming weeks. But the observation made by the chair at the beginning of this session, the gap between the boss's agenda that is underway and the passive resistance of the labor leadership is wider than ever. And so the Workers' Action Movement, WAM, and other militant workers can fill that yawning gap that exists. We can challenge the bureaucracy, and we can promote escalating mass job actions towards a general strike to dump Doug Ford and to set a new agenda for the entire labor movement. That's what WAM has on its agenda. And remember, every great oak tree grew from a tiny acorn. That's what we're in the business of doing, and that is planting that seed, nourishing it, and building the movement that's going to make a difference. Because as you all know, an injury to one is an injury
to all.
Here, here.
In unity, there is strength. Thanks.
Brother Kurt, I think I had you next.
Yeah, so I'm gonna start by saying, yeah, we must oppose strike breaking legislation, but we also must oppose strike breaking within the unions themselves, because the union leadership often opposes any call for action from the membership, and will quickly call our members back to work, even when the masses of the workers still feel that they have more fight in them to continue. So, speaking to our guest, Rebecca, are there any members, what are the members doing in Oshawa to oppose the local leadership to just accept this deal that they currently made?
Okay. I've got two more speakers, and then we'll close it out at 5 and go back to the panel. Brother, just over there, I think I had you next.
Just a question actually to maybe Rebecca.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think the message in the back was not delivered, even though the bailout from the government? So, why do you think it's not the proper message?
Dominic, or
I think
Go ahead,
Dominic's
Dominic.
first probably, yeah.
yeah,
Alright,
as
cool.
the last for this round. Did you want to?
Sure, if it's short.
I'm gonna kind of jump on Kurt's point around unions also opposing strike action, and I'll end with a question in just a minute. But so my local, which is the OPSU 594, we took a strike vote which was 100%, and 85% of our membership showed up to the vote. This is after 4 or 5 when the strike vote, so we mobilized for 4 months without telling OPSU we were gonna end with a strike vote. We didn't tell anybody other than the people in our local. In May, when we told OPSU we needed a staff rep to count our ballots or oversee this process, people called me to try to talk me out of having the membership take a strike vote. And then we took one anyway. So essentially, I just said, I know what my rights are. You need to send somebody, so they sent somebody to count our ballots. And then we did a day of action against our employer, which coincided with the board of directors meeting. Again, thanks to WAM and Socialist Action for sending people to attend that as well. But again, 80% of our membership was out there in front of the board of directors, chatting with the board of directors. It also coincided with the executive director's retirement party. So quite embarrassing. But I mean, this was in June. 2 days after embargoing, we reached a deal that the membership voted on.
Right.
As well
Fair,
as
fair.
100%.
Right.
But weeks later, or a couple of weeks later, through some very weird grapevine, I was told that OPSU felt it wasn't sufficient for me to embarrass the executive director at her own retirement party. Right, so
Damn.
this came from OPSU staff reps who make $150,000 a year, or something like that, right?
Show
Like
some
OPSU
respect.
staff who make that much money are saying, don't embarrass people. Which again, I don't care, but again, it's about suppressing voices
Yeah.
within the labor movement. So I know, and to touch on Julius's point, we talked about like the NDP, and we can't wait, or in Manitoba, sorry, we can't wait for 2 more years to go, or 4 more years to kind of have another vote. We have to build now. But also then what's the plan to build, to replace Jerry Diaz or Smokey at the heads of these unions? Because we also can't wait for like a 2-day conference where people aren't involved and aren't active to try to change leadership. We have to start, or somebody, and I know WAM's a huge part of this, but like an actual strategic plan of replacing these like misleaders, as they're called in WAM. So that's my question of like, where do you see that going over the next year and a half? And I'm sorry, I don't know when Unifor's next elections are,
We just had
but
them.
you just had, okay. Yeah, so where do you see that going?
Excellent. I will send it back to the panelists. Do you think 5 minutes apiece is sufficient to? Okay, and maybe I'll go. Do you want to go first?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go. We'll go order of Julius. So reverse order.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what it's going to take to sort of get people engaged is going to be struggle and victory, because it inspires people. It makes people feel like change is possible. And it's like a chicken or the egg thing, which is difficult. It's compounded that much more difficult because the bureaucrats are continuously in our way. But more than that, I mean, it's
Because they're chicken?
because they're chicken. Well, they're not chicken. They're looking after their own self-interest. But more than that, it's because, workers live in a culture, in a society where our class struggle is never seen as a positive thing. And those two things, the bureaucrats use that as well to try to keep a damper down. So, OPSU had elections recently. There was someone who ran against Smokey, Sarah LaBelle. She was slightly to the left of Smokey. If she had won, it would have been, it would have been better. But really what it's going to take is, it's going to take an organized group like the Workers' Action Movement to be organized and to challenge the status quo in different unions, supporting different strikes that are taking place, challenging the labor bureaucrats at every opportunity, and letting all those others who are involved with unions know that we exist and that this is what we want to do if you agree with us. And it's a building process. It's not something that's going to happen over a few years, although dramatic change has happened, throughout history in short amounts of time. It's really hard to say exactly how it's going to happen. But what I would say for sure is that if we aren't doing what we're doing right now, it's not going to happen. Just another example of the absurdity of the leadership when it comes to the boss and defending the boss. I was at a recent NUPCHI convention, which is the National Union of Public and General Employees. OPSU is affiliated to it so that we can affiliate to the CLC. And we had an OPSU breakup meeting where Smokey spoke. And he basically, this was right after the Raptors won, and he got to the front of the meeting and he said, first of all, there was a fundraiser that was taking place out in Oshawa for Ford fundraiser. And he basically called off OPSU's participation in protesting this fundraiser, which was totally ridiculous because there was buses, like 1 or 2 buses that were ready to send people to protest this fundraiser. He said, we don't want to kick Doug Ford while he's down. Give him, not quite give him a chance, but let's play nice and maybe he'll be nice with us. He said that when Doug Ford was introduced when the Raptors won at the victory party and he was booed, that was shameful. He
What?
said this to a room full of 100 delegates and OXU members, and you could hear a pin drop. And it was such a mixed message. It was so demoralizing. It was also demoralizing of the lack of response from the people in the room to such a ridiculous statement when our own members' jobs are on the line. Like, there's so much on the line right now. You know, so it's tough what we're trying to do, right? It is really tough. And I've been thinking about it, you know, I've been involved doing this stuff for 10, 12 years, and sometimes you gotta shake your head and wonder, where the fuck is everybody else, you know? Why aren't people doing something, you know? But we gotta start from somewhere. That's all the way I see it. And hopefully, you know, I mean, I hope that we can get 3 solid candidates to run against the status quo, people, whoever the fuck they choose, and that the whole convention is gonna hear a different story. That's what I see as being, you know, absolutely fundamentally important for us to do. And I think that that's our task at hand. We're small. We're teaming up with other folks. We're teaming up with Barry and other folks, and we just got to try. We got to try our best, and I'll end there.
Here, here. Excellent. Thank you, Julius. Becca?
So I was asked a few questions. I'm going to start with the first one as to why the message on the back of the shirt is problematic. So it is basically saying we didn't bail out GM with taxpayer money so that they could send jobs to China and Mexico. So it should be a nuanced message, right? The union is talking about Canadian tax dollars should be supporting Canadian workers and Canadian investment. And that's sort of a common sense approach. But when you do that in a mass PR campaign set against the backdrop of Trump and his attack on Mexicans or immigrants, or the rise of the alt-right in racism and problems like that, Labor needs to be particularly careful how they phrase any messaging. And this type of nuanced approach, I think, gets lost in a mass PR campaign, and you start hearing things like Mexicans are taking our jobs. Mexicans don't fight for their rights. Mexicans don't care about their standard of living, and they're taking all our good jobs. Right? And that's, to me, that's really, really problematic, because that just sows division, and it makes international unity and solidarity very, very difficult. I know there was a Facebook post from UAW members, and they were really, really upset that there was Canadian-made vehicles in the showroom. And that really offended some of the Canadian workers. They're like, why are they responding like that to our products there? Well, it's the same reason that we're responding to Mexican products, right? So it makes it, I just don't think that it's the type of tactic that Labor should use for a mass PR campaign under these circumstances. The next question was, how do you oppose strike breaking within the unions? And I'd like to just relate very quickly. So I don't know what the situation is as of today, but as of yesterday, there's a Unifor parts supplier unit called NEMAC in Windsor, and they are on an illegal strike right now. So the region and province has given this company a few $1 million to stay. They were supposed to have a contract till 2020 or 2022, and they've announced that they're leaving. They're going to move the jobs to Mexico. The workers are understandably upset, have gone on an illegal strike.
Could you repeat the name, please?
NEMAC, I believe it's NEMAK. It's in Windsor. There was an injunction ruling that said that they needed to go back to work. Unifor has defied the injunction. They've been slapped with a $75,000 fine, which will continue at $10,000 a day, every day that they continue. And as well, there were 4 people who were personally named to Jerry Diaz 2 members from the local affected and another staff rep, I believe, who are going to be facing, I think as of today or tomorrow, $1,000 fines per person per day for keeping the workers out. On
Weapon.
Unifor has flaws, that's for sure. But they also have a lot of strengths. And I think if the workers are demanding and like, I think it's a bit of a fallacy, that we buy into that because it's a union, they're supposed to do things and we should be able to help support their efforts. But that's not usually the way things work. People have to yell and scream to get things to move in the right direction. Unions didn't support women's rights to begin with. They had to fight to get that support. Unions didn't support people of color to begin with. They had to fight to get that support. And I think it's important that we remember that we have to fight and get the union's support. And then when we have that collective power and solidarity, we're almost unstoppable.
Right on.
But-
Here, here.
How do you oppose strike breaking? First, you've got to get a strong left voice out there. You've got to educate your members. I know at GM, people were upset. It was hard to get people to put down their tools sometimes. People were scared. They didn't know what to do. That's not just a leadership issue. It was buying into whether they even have that power to do that. And we, as individuals, can make the difference as to whether people believe that or not. It doesn't have to come from above. It comes from below,
Right on.
The other comment I wanted to make is that we talk a lot about electoral politics. When are we going to elect this leader out, or when are we going to elect that leader out? And again, I think that we put way too much emphasis on the electoral politics, because that is just such a small part of what makes our democracy work. If we are not pushing from the bottom every day with everything that we're doing, it doesn't matter who's elected to the top. We have obvious structural problems with democracy. You see that in our politics, in our unions. You can see it in just about every organization that there is. So we have to figure out what's causing that structural problem and how do we remedy that? Because it's not just the leadership. They're not all bad people. They start out as good people. So what happens along that path that the bureaucracy disempowers the base? I'm not sure what the answer to that is, except that we need to keep pushing from the bottom and not worry so much necessarily who's at the top. We just need to make sure whoever is up there is hearing our voice.
Here, here. Let's have it again for Secretary Bevan. Jay, possible to you, brother?
Yeah. But I come to election part of it. So my immediate goal is I am trying to force our regional office, CBW, to send a delegate of minimum 10 from regional office itself to OIFM, because we had to take action on that election. Okay, not the election, but the right leadership for the labor movement. Okay, and the next one is, I am trying to change with the help of our national executive, especially our second VP is very cooperative, and he is radical himself, Dave Blakeney. Radicalize the teachings of educating our membership, who we are, because lot of new, even I am part of that community, because we try to think, okay, most people, the book, the collective agreement is a handout of management, is a gallbladder without any pain. Yes, for new employees, okay, they struggle nothing, they got that benefits already in place. But I think we had to tell them the history. Who paid the price for that gains in the collective bargain, or night recovery, or benefits, or English benefits, maternity? Who went to jail? It's not conservative, it's not NDP, it's not liberal, it's only the labor movement, the leader, he went to jail for the price. So we we pay for the price, and it's our part to do, it's our time to give the, we had to pay our price to get that benefit in place, as well as to move forward. And then union workers is a part of community. It's not, unions are not for union, it's for community. So we had to encourage, we had to force our union to make inroads with the communities. Without community support, union standalone, no. It's not a military force. It's a human part. It's a part to build bridges with all groups. We had to break the barriers of color, caste, and religious or cultural barriers. That's what we are. Now, my question to, I don't know how many people you agree with that, but I asked our NDP leader, as a progressive party leader, how do you carry your religious belief into the progressive party? Okay, I'm a Hindu, Orthodox Hindu family, but the thing is, I throw my identity as a religious person, a Tamil person. I'm a human. Okay? I am a living soul with blood and flesh, bones, that's all I look for. That's what I want to see. Okay, it can be a conservative party, you can do any damn. You can be a priest, or you can be a Brahmin, or whatever, the guru or whatever. But as a progressive party, NDP, okay, we had to show a human face, not a secluded face. Okay, maybe it's your freedom of choice, but the thing is, when it comes to freedom of progressive party, the leadership reflect as a human. They had to show it. So that's what we had to bring them. Understanding, okay? It's not against a religion, it's not against language, it's not against cultures, but the thing is, those things are religions, in my experience, okay? Divide and kill, more human than great wars. If you want to read the history, read it. Because good number of people, they don't know what religion did all over the world. What language struggles did all over the world. Okay, from east to west, north to south. So if we are carrying our individual identities or this, no, our identity is human. Okay, we love, we are born free, and we are equal. Okay, this lesson has to reflect from our union ranks. This is our goal. Hopefully, I will do something within my lifetime in our union. The step is we are going to go to OFL as a delegate from my office, regional office. Thank you.
Now, I'll test the audience. Is there appetite for another round? Do we have more? Do we have people that are more interested in following questions? Any first-time speakers? What do we think? Do we want to do another round? Okay, we'll do a lightning round in a sense. And Corey had you down for one. Is there another speaker? Okay, well, we'll start with Corey, and if there's another speaker, we'll go from there. And if not, so Corey, go ahead.
Okay, I was going to talk about the NEMAC plant actually, because I thought that was pretty cool. It's the first example, I think, in a long time of workers defying legislation and actually staying on strike. So I think it's something to look to and build bridges with. I mean, but it's kind of funny how Jerry Diaz, who co-opted Oshawa to go back to work, is now front and center saying that they're going to stay at NEMAC until they get a contract, right? And I know a guy who used to be in the negotiating team for Unifor or CAW before, and he was saying that Diaz used to actually go in and organize plant occupations. I mean, that was his job, though. But it's funny, though, that now he's in this prestigious position of privilege that he works so tightly with, he seems to work so tightly with GM management. So I wonder why his approach to NEMAC is different, and I think maybe because it's a smaller company, it's more vulnerable. He doesn't have as many ties to it. And anyways, I'm just thinking about that, and within the leadership in general. And I just wanted to say something also about like identity politics, and although it's important to appreciate everyone's cultural differences of the different places we all come from and stuff, I think it's been a big problem within organizations. I mean, maybe it's controversial to say, but I think it's been a big problem within like the NDP and within maybe different unions as well, focusing so much on identity politics and away from broader social issues or struggles. And so I don't know if you guys want to talk about that at all anymore, but I was just thinking about that. Anyways, thank you.
Thanks, Corey. Yeah, and the last point, I'm touching on a major fault line in the movement, certainly. And it's part of an ongoing discussion, but it's not class first, not identity politics per se, but it's sort of a melding of the two and recognizing social privilege, but also fighting for working class gains, right? Is there any other speakers? Let's do once, twice. Okay, so we'll end off this round with Corey's any notes, so we can go back to the panel for any concluding remarks. You can take as long as you. Julius, we'll start with you.
Oh, okay. Well, I just, I want to give a special shout out to the activists in Hamilton who shut down the Labor Day parade because.
Yeah.
Shut down Trudeau, not the.
Yes,
Labor.
well, that's right, but they shut down the boss's parade. No, that's a whole other issue.
Co-opting. Yeah.
But they stopped it until that strike-breaking prick was out of the parade. So, good job, good job. That's a fine example for the rest of us. I guess really that's, there's not really a whole lot more I want to say, except I wanted to touch on Corey's point a little bit. You know, it's funny how the bureaucracy really shifts left or right and then left. And they try to cover their tracks a little bit sometimes. Like, I think about my own experiences with Smokey and how much red baiting he used to do with me all the time. And then he put out a statement recently talking about how popular socialism has become in Canada. You know, after I'm off the board, that it's safe to use the S word. So, you know, it's,
Scab.
you know, so anyway, I mean, I think that in some ways, and really I would say the bureaucrats are really afraid of formations like Workers' Action Movement because they're terrified of militant unionists becoming organized. And I used to get all kinds of overreactions from the bureaucracy in my own union about being involved in organizing WAM. It was kind of hilarious considering what kind of capacity we actually have, but I guess they just don't want something like this taking off. I think that they realize that at some levels that, you know, the workers' movement is a bit of a tinderbox, and they're just terrified of losing it. And as the capitalist crisis worsens, it's going to become even more so. That's it.
Here. Thank you, Julius. Why don't, Jay, I'm going to toss it off to you, and then we'll end off with concluding remarks from you, Rebecca. Does that sound good? Okay.
I have maybe like a small.
You got one more question? Okay, let's do
more
it. Let's
question
slide it in.
To Jay, like.
Yeah.
With the development countries now recruiting many immigrants, like coming, like for example, Germany is seeking, like even refugees, they look at it as a like humanitarian aspect, but like really they need to beef up their markets with the cheap labor. So Japan is also aging country, and they are also looking to get. So what happened is that when you got this influx of immigrants or if they're refugee, they fill up these labor market, and do you think they kind of imbalance the internal worker movement by having these, you know, kind of not enrolled, not organized labor with the immigration? So like, I mean, does they imbalance or they affect somehow negatively the internal of that country? Let's say they immigrated to Germany or to Canada or
Yeah. What I see, I read something about Japan and the foreign workers.
Yeah.
They have been treated like modern slaves. Respected slaves. So they have a good place to live, eat, and work. There's nothing else. Okay, they are not treated as human. That's what I read, and I have seen some documentaries. So that's Japan. Okay, it's going to dehumanize. Yes, that's true. It's going to happen. But the thing is, it may be a struggle, but Japan immigrant population is so minimal. Okay, it's a society, closed society. We don't see that, but that's a reality. And Germany is another part. Okay, there are established communities are there because the Turkey population is there, Germanized population. So it may be different because Western human rights activists, they don't want to show in front of other people that we are violating human rights because they play human rights angels to other people, other side of the world. Okay, but Japan is still rigid, so it's going to create an imbalance. That's true. But the thing is, how the local working class, the local Japanese working class, going to accept? Okay, they are going to develop their sympathy and empathy for the upcoming labor force from outside to have that equilibrium, keep that equilibrium. How they are educated. That's maybe it comes to us, how our links, how our inroads with the international working class to help create that understanding and acceptance. Okay, I don't see that this not done properly these days because capitalism, the competition capitalism taking over the world for a long time, and then we try to sit on the chair, and then whatever we get, that's okay. Whatever it is. So that's what I see from our union leadership. Whatever we get is okay. That's a biggest crime against humanity in our part. At the same time, when they bring those skilled workers from other third world, so-called, so it's going to create an imbalance there because there are a mass of people without so-called skills. So the poorer is going to get more poorer. So this Donald Trump's group, that 1% can manipulate those third world to their ministry. It's a sad part, but the thing is, for us, international human rights activists as well as working class Arabs, we had to do our part without expecting the timely results, but we had to do our part. So the question is, are we doing our part? From my union perspective, my experience, we are not doing our part enough, even the minimum. Let us start from charity begins at home. It's the wrong chord, but anyway, I am not a charity minded. I'm always looking for human, right? The human should not live on charity. Okay? We have enough things in the plate, but the thing is, it should be equally shared. Thank you.
Hear, hear.
That's a very important aspect of our discussion is the immigrant context in different labor economies. And I mean, we're on this small blue ball in space, right? So it's obvious socialism, internationalism is the the only humane system to employ, but we're very divided. And the context of immigrant labor in the Canadian context is very insightful to read in basically how when the early Canadian state was being formatted, they basically needed to import a modern industrial proletariat to the Canadian state, and they would do this with subsequent waves of immigrants. And every time a certain wave of immigrants they brought in started to organize, they would bring in another group that they could get more and more, they could exploit more, right? And it's this vicious kind of cycle. So, how do we move from a nationalist context to a strictly internationalist context, right? Just to touch on that. Thank you, Jay. Rebecca, I'm going to end it off with you. We've had a great discussion so far, and I really liked Rebecca's comments, so I wanted to end off with her.
Okay, so I guess there's two points. This probably isn't going to be popular, but it's worth mentioning. Jerry Diaz is our Unifor National President. He was just acclaimed, along with the rest of the elected executives, at a democratically elected convention by approximately 2,000 other elected delegates. Okay, so nobody ran against him, and there was very little opposition, if any, to his becoming president. And so again, I'd say when we're talking about pointing fingers at who is the president, we can say, well, it's all orchestrated and people are pulling strings and everybody's just puppets. But that's not a fact at all. People have cast their ballots and voted. Now, whether they were educated or mobilized to vote in the way that some of us would like them to isn't the issue. The issue is these people voted, and these are the results that we're getting. So what happens to people at the top? I don't know, but I think part of it is if you're working within a capitalist framework and you're not fighting for the end of that framework, at some point you have to become, I guess I would say, pragmatic. And you have to try to find conciliations within that framework, and that is never going to be to the advantage of the working class.
Yeah.
So how do we deal with that? That's a question that comes out of the question that you asked, I think, Cory. The other thing is regarding how the membership has become. I had a conversation and I was talking about it. I said, what's wrong with this convention? It's on paper, it should be extremely democratic. We have a great constitution. We have well-run elections generally. We have open debate, and yet it doesn't feel like it's democracy in action, even though it is. And one of the things that was identified is that we have sort of created a culture where members act as an audience instead of being active participants in the running of the union. And so I think that's something that we really need to focus on, is getting people away from just watching what's going on to participating in what's going on. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert at all in identity politics at all, but I really struggle with it because in my heart, I believe if you have economic justice, then you're going to have justice across the board. But the fight for that is so massive, and there has been so many injustices to people of varying identities, that I think it's a crime if we don't do everything that we can to make sure that we hear their stories and what has happened to them and their experiences, and then work our hardest to make sure that there's inclusion, that everybody has space to be on board with the fight for economic justice. So I don't think that it needs to be an either or. Either you have identity politics or it's all about your economic justice and class. I think they go hand in hand at this stage in history, because we have to try to recognize the wrongs that have been historically.
Thank you.
Thank you, sister. Thank you, everybody. Great discussion. Please stick around till the next panel, where we're going to get into some of the meat of the plan for these conference, for the Ontario Federation of Conference, possibly the CLC, to impart some of these ideas and impart a class struggle left-wing perspective into the unions and place it all in front and center before those to hear. Which is something that is on the order of the day, we feel. So 3 p.m. for an action program.